Hi all, welcome back. In this module, we're talking about the idea of design, particularly communication design. So design is obviously something that comes from its own area of study outside of communication. But when we think about difficult conversations, the idea of design has been really influential. So why is that? Let's take a look at that. So the process of design, or the definition of design, is the process of transforming something given into something preferred through intervention and invention. So what does it mean to take a design stance on communication? Because we can see designing like a product, taking some sort of material like steel and transforming it we have that's given, transforming it to something preferred like a bridge or a car or whatever, right, through some sort of process of design. But what does that mean about communication? So Mark Aukus, who's a communication scholar who's talked about design, talks about this idea, saying, quote, a central puzzle that people face from a design perspective is how to make communication possible that once was difficult, impossible, or unimagined. Communication design happens when there's an intervention into some ongoing activity through the invention of techniques, devices, and procedures that aim to redesign interactivity and thus shape the possibilities for communication. So that helps us see the connection to difficult conversations. We see that some conversations or conversations about certain topics, conversations across difference are really hard, and people will say like, well, we can't even have that conversation. It's impossible. I can't even imagine having that conversation. Aukus and others who talk about design say it is possible. What can we invent? What kind of devices, techniques, and procedures can redesign the way that we interact and shape the possibilities for communication? So how does that work? Well, it's a process of observing what's the typical communication pattern, assessing what's working and what isn't, shifting aspects of the process, observing again as needed, right? This idea of kind of improvising or innovating. It emphasizes being creative, not getting stuck in a routine, like, oh, we've always done it this way, there's no other option, and not getting frozen by, analysis paralysis, so we can't change anything until we're absolutely certain it'll work. Design says, tweak something, see what happens, try again. So let's think about a couple examples. If you have a typical group meeting, like a team meeting or a planning meeting or something like this, what's the process for how that meeting usually works? Do you have an agenda? Is it are you at a table that's round or a table that is kind of square? Or is everybody in their own space? Is it online? Like what's going on, right? And so what's that process? Does it help the team do the work it needs? Do people leave the meeting feeling like they were valued and heard? Do people feel they got all the information that they needed? If yes, great. Then that's fine. But if not, then what can you tweak about the way the meeting works to try to make it better, right? You could reorganize the agenda, build in some time for something that's meaningful for the group, change how the group manages speaking turns, that sort of thing. You can think about the similar kind of idea about a typical conversation around politics, right? Say you're talking about some sort of controversial topic. What makes that uncomfortable? What makes it not work well? And how could that be shifted, right? Think about, where do you talk about politics? What are people trying to accomplish? How many people are around in the discussion? What kind of technology is involved? You could use design to adapt any of these dimensions of the conversation. And there's a lot of interesting research on how do you promote dialogue and deliberation, even on social media platforms where typically there's a big public audience and people are trying to persuade, so it's not really meant for that kind of deeper conversation. But design elements mean staying mindful of the purpose and making choices about the people, the place, and the process. So the people, who should be here, the place, where are we, what's the space like, what do we want it to be, process, what are we doing together, does it help us meet our goals, what can we shift? So you can see why folks who are interested in difficult conversations are intrigued by this concept of communication and design. And when deliberation and dialogue folks think about design, they have a whole list of characteristics or tasks that design or that are elements of design, right? So there's things like recruitment, Like who and how do you get people there? Who do you want at your event and how do you get them there? Ground rules or agreements, like what are we going to do in our process that makes it the way that we want? Facilitators, we're going to talk about facilitation in later modules. We really want dialogue and deliberation, the design of those, to emphasize interaction. So not necessarily a lecture from an expert, but maybe information from experts, but then you do something with it. You're talking with small groups of people. You're responding to interesting questions, right? Dialogue and deliberation people are taking really careful attention to the shape of the space. I've seen people make it like colorful, decorate, bring like toys and fidgety things that people can play with, or candy, or like markers, right? All kinds of stuff to make the space feel more creative, inviting, welcoming, fun, whatever, right? To try to make it different. Things like the timing of the event, how long different things last, questions, processes for managing speaking turns, ways to capture the learning. All of these are aspects of dialogue and deliberation design. So dialogue and deliberation use a pretty wide variety of methods, which are all carefully designed to help groups meet particular goals. Some of the ones we'll see in this module are deliberative mini-publics, like citizens initiative reviews. Others are things like open space, world cafe, participatory budgeting. These are all like designed very differently. They all involve interaction and facilitation and like difficult kind of ideas and topics, but they're really organized differently from another. There are also ones that are like structured reflective dialogue used by essential partners, circle practice, collective storytelling that are more dialogic. There are increasingly digital platforms designed to promote deliberation and dialogue through the use of structured agendas, moderators, digital content, interactivity types of things. And so there's all kinds of stuff happening, I guess, is the main point here, right? And we're introduced to some of them in this module. The last thing I want to say about design here is that the ground rules or communication agreements for dialogue and deliberation are a really important part of the design. So sometimes in this kind of work, I'll spend time with group members at the beginning and set ground rules together and ask them, like, what do we want to do in this conversation? How do we want to be together? And that conversation, I'm writing things up on a board or somewhere where we can see it and kind of capturing it, and we craft them together. That can take a while, but it can be more personal to the group and help people feel some ownership of the process. Other times, depending on who the group is, what the goal is, how much time we have, I might bring in ground rules to start us off, and then folks can add to them or adjust as needed. Some examples are being mindful of time, respect each other, make space for everyone to speak. Sometimes there's things like listen deeply and focus on understanding, speak your truth without blaming, right? And so just ideas like that get us going. Sometimes we'll even use a tool like oops, ouch, and whoa as a shorthand for people to speak up if they said something they regret, which is oops, or they feel attacked or hurt, ouch, or they need a moment to think and clarify because things are moving too fast, whoa. Those are little shorthands that can be kind of helpful. So these might not be the specific agreements or ground rules that would work for you, but the main idea here is that if we're designing a new kind of conversation, we need to help people know how to engage in it. So communication agreements or ground rules help make that possible. So that's it for now. Facilitator's job is to monitor that process, to focus on the process, design it, and kind of help groups work through it, and to spend the next 2 modules on the course learning about facilitation so you can develop those skills. I hope you find this stuff meaningful and interesting, and I look forward to seeing your reflections.